You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 26th of November, 2024, on Monocle Radio.
Imprisoned Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan summons his supporters. Does he know what he might be unleashing? Russia forges heartwarming new alliance with the Taliban, and Angela Merkel finds the "I was right all along" subtext of her memoir falling on deaf ears. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Lynn O'Donnell and Charles Hecker will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from Granta editor Thomas Meany about the venerable literary journal's new edition focusing on China. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Lynn O'Donnell, columnist for Foreign Policy magazine, and Charles Hecker, senior partner at Control Risks and actual author of Zero Sum, the Arc of International Business in Russia. Hello to you both.
Hi. Good evening.
Charles, we do have to start with this because regular listeners to the Daily, like there are any other kind, etc., will be aware that we have been mocking, goading, teasing and frankly doubting you for months about this book. Years, in fact, possibly. But it's done. It's finished. I've seen copies. It exists.
And I've been grateful for every word of the mocking and all of the teasing and all of the sort of jolly harassment. And a huge thank you, Andrew, for being such an on-air cheerleader. I'm very, very grateful for that.
I mean, I haven't read it yet. It might be dreadful.
That's right.
I may have to pivot.
This may be my last appearance on the Daily. So it's only 2 more sleeps before it comes out. And so on Thursday, a book called Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia, is released on the UK and the rest of Europe. And it is, in a nutshell, about one of the greatest carnivals ever in the history of global commerce, and that is the opening of the Russian market in 1991 and its extremely messy closing in 2022.
Yeah, it just all worked out tremendously for everybody, as I understand it.
I thought that was very kind of them to do this for me and to give me this great book idea. And of course, yes, but Russia's now a great place to do business. But of the 1,800 companies that have left, most of them are now and still applying burn ointment and are regretting perhaps that they ever went there in the first place.
And Lynn, you have been off on your travels and helpfully foreshadowing something we are about to just deal with in terms of breaking news. You are recently back from Israel.
I am, yeah. I went for just a few days last week. I visited mostly Tel Aviv, did a little bit of travelling around the country, yeah.
How did you find it? I mean, they're now 13 months and a little bit into the war occasioned by last October 7th. Did you get I'm aware that Israel, among all countries, it is a ridiculous place to generalise about the mood, but was there a sort of overarching sense you took away from it?
Yeah, very much a country at war, very angry and bitter and traumatised by the events of October 7 last year. The country is plastered with photographs of the hostages when you arrive at the airport. You're coming out of the airport, and on both sides of you are photographs of the people who have been held for, more than a year by Hamas. And rocket fire, even in central Tel Aviv. There was at least one occasion when we were forced into a shelter by missile fire. Yeah.
And will you be writing anything about this that our listeners can read anywhere at any point?
Yeah, I've written a piece about it for the New European, which I think I'll be updating after the events of today.
Well, we will have more from you both shortly, but first we are going to Tel Aviv and to Alison Kaplan-Sommer, a journalist at Haaretz, because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is, we were told, speaking now about. Alison, this is presumably about a ceasefire where the operations in Lebanon are concerned. Have we heard anything?
we have, as you said, he's going on now. He's speaking. The cabinet just came and started deliberating. Very quickly appears to be emerging to come out. And the reports, I told your producers that I am probably more ignorant than I could be at any possible time, because it's about to be announced exactly at this hour when your show kicks off. But everyone is expecting the announcement of the ceasefire agreement that in the America, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been teasing. It's ready. It's almost ready. It's about to be finalized. And so we are expecting an agreement, the outlines of which we know, but we're not absolutely sure exactly what the details are.
I mean, yeah, it is terrifically inconvenient rather to us as a program that people seem to insist on making dramatic announcements at 1800 hours London time, mid-afternoon. If anyone's listening, would work for us an awful lot better. But is it reasonable to expect that Netanyahu will attempt to frame this as a great victory, the vanquishing of Hezbollah?
Well, I don't know about the vanquishing of Hezbollah, because he cannot claim that. And actually, there are protests. There was a protest about an hour ago in front of the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. And there are very loud protests. There have been all day from residents of the north who think that he is stopping too soon. He's used some grandiose rhetoric, as he did in Gaza, and he is in the north. We will take them apart. We will eliminate the threat. And in the real world, in the realistic world, you can't make Hezbollah disappear. It's always going to stay in one form. And the question is, when can Israel feel that enough has been done, that its power has been deteriorated enough, weighed against the costs of the war to stop. So there's no total satisfaction with it, but there are some victories in it. The biggest victory in this is the fact that they have gotten Hezbollah / behind them their Iranian sponsors to agree to a settlement in Lebanon that is disconnected from a settlement or lack thereof in Gaza. Because if you recall, Hezbollah went into this war to support their Palestinian brothers in Gaza and declared over and over again that they would not stop their military actions until there was a Gaza settlement. Well, there is no Gaza settlement, and Hezbollah and Iran are coming to the table. So that is an achievement on the Israeli side.
Alison, you are correct in pointing out that the terms of this agreement have been pretty heavily telegraphed in advance, one of which is going to be that Hezbollah will retreat north beyond the Litani River, as actually they should have done, 18 years ago now, according to the UN Security Council resolution that ended the war in 2006, 1701, if memory serves. Is there any hope in Israel that will enable those many thousands of Israelis who've been evacuated from towns in the north to go back home?
Well, there's definitely a hope, and very symbolically, today was the first day that Israeli forces reached the Litani River in their incursion. So I don't think that was much of a coincidence. The parts of the agreement that we think are in place, that people are happy about, is instilling the right of Israel to retaliate if it's attacked. That was important, and that was a sticking point for a long time. Israel did not want its hands tied if it was attacked, even in a minor way, and that principle, I have heard, is in the agreement. But the problem with the feeling of safety, or instilling a feeling of safety in the northern residents, is the sense that even if the forces are beyond the Litani River, that they are going to allow people to rebuild the houses, villages, homes that are very close to the Israeli border. And as we know, it's very hard to distinguish what's just a house that a family is living in and what is holding arms and missiles that can be used to attack Israel. So there's a feeling of discomfort that, again, as happened, over the past 15 years after the decisive Second Lebanon War, that there's going to be some sort of creeping return in some form. It's going to be difficult for Israel to rely on what we think is going to be an international committee that's going to police Hezbollah activity, overseen by, we hear, the United States, France, and other European countries.
Alison Kaplan-Sommer with Haaretz in Tel Aviv, thank you for joining us. There will be much more on that presumable ceasefire announcement on tomorrow morning's Globalist on Monocle Radio and on our programming throughout the day. But now you are listening to the Monocle Daily, and it is back to our panel, Lynn O'Donnell and Charles Hecker, and we're going to look at Pakistan, which appears as we go to air to be on the brink of something or other, but then when doesn't it? A hefty convoy of supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan has descended upon Islamabad despite a ban on public gatherings and a huge deployment of security forces intended to scare them off. There have been several violent clashes in which 4 soldiers and 2 protesters are known to have been killed and dozens more people injured. Khan is currently imprisoned on a variety of charges which he claims are politically motivated fit-ups. Lynn, first of all, and with all due recognition that I'm sure there is a very long answer to this question, basically what is going on here?
Like where do we start? First the earth cooled.
Etc.
It's yet again Imran Khan and his PTI party basically trying to force the government's hand. I can't help feeling whenever these sort of things happen that if there were jobs that people had to keep them busy and earn an income to keep their families and send their children to school and buy them houses and stuff, then they wouldn't need to do this. But politics in Pakistan are such that the tradition has become, you lost, so we're going to lock you up. Imran Khan did exactly the same to his opponents when he was the Prime Minister. And if he ever is the Prime Minister again, I reckon he'll probably do it to whoever he's identifying as his enemies now. He is locked up. The charges are most likely to be politically motivated, and Imran Khan is the only centrifugal political figure who can really get out these sort of numbers and has been able to do that since he was toppled from power in 2022. So the clashes have been going on. You've got 100,000 people marching on Islamabad. You've got police and paramilitary forces out there, tear gas, bullets. Who knows how long it's going to go on. Imran Khan's wife has been leading the charge, so to speak, and she's basically made it clear that we don't stop until Imran is out of jail.
Just to follow that up, though, Lynn, Khan in the last hour or two has reportedly issued a statement basically saying, come one, come all, the more the merrier. You are right, obviously, in pointing out that he has an enormous personal following and a reminder to our listeners in the non-cricket playing parts of the world that, strange though that may seem, that is based originally in the fact that he was a very successful captain of Pakistan's Test cricket team for many years. But is there a chance, and it would not be the first time in human history that such a thing has happened, that he may have unleashed forces he cannot entirely control?
Oh, I don't think there's a chance. I think that that's a fact, you know. There is a lot of anger and disappointment and disillusionment amongst the Pakistani population, and I just think that he's very lucky that he's not on the receiving end of it.
I mean, Charles, he is entitled to claim that his party won the most recent election, which they sort of did. They were disbarred from standing in it, but they ran a slate of independents as independents, but everybody knew who they were voting for, really. And as Lynn points out, the response of his opponents was to sort of devise reasons to lock him up. Is the trouble, and you would think Pakistani politicians and politicians generally would learn this, they've made him more powerful by putting him in prison?
Yeah, there is a sort of martyr aspect to all of this, and communiques from your jail cell are quite effective ways of sort of rallying the troops around you.
I mean, we have, all jokes aside, seen a quite similar dynamic play out in the United States.
Well, it's funny. So you do see, and Lynn and I were discussing this actually before we came on the air, before we came into the studio, you do see some of the trends that are being talked about in politics and in electoral politics around the world manifesting in Pakistan, and that is, number one, locking up your opponents. And we're waiting to see whether that happens in a few other places that have had contested elections. And then the other thing is sowing doubt about vote counts. And that's one of the tools that Imran Khan is using to whip up his supporters. I should also point out, in the greatest of ironies, that the security cordon around Islamabad was breached by the protesters on the eve of a visit to Islamabad by Alexander Lukashenko from Belarus. And so the capital has gone into lockdown. The media are shut down. They've pulled the plugs on anything electronic. And here comes the president of Belarus in for a friendly chat with the prime minister.
But relations are fine.
Yes, exactly. Nothing to see here.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is just another Thursday. Lynn, this may be one of those things where I suspect to ask the question is to answer it. But if by some means or another Khan was freed from his present predicament, and if by some means or another he was able to return to power in Pakistan, and many funnier things have happened in Pakistan, certainly. Is Pakistan actually fundamentally governable, even if somebody of Imran Khan's stature is attempting to govern it? Is that basically the problem everybody keeps running up against, which is that this construct just does not work?
Oh, I don't think that it's ungovernable, because that implies that nothing would ever work. It is governed by inherently corrupt entities. I spent the summer in Karachi. It's the sort of place where you get off the plane and you can see corruption hanging in the air, There's no civic services. The garbage isn't collected. It's the buildings, the public buildings are not looked after, renovated in any way. There's no ambulances. There's nobody to come and pick up bodies of people who die from the heat, But the Bhuttos who run Karachi take over vast swathes of public land, and they get in their helicopters and they just fly over it. And Lahore is corrupt in another way. So the people have every right to be angry, and I think what they see in Imran Khan is an alternative to what they have. But Imran Khan was the Prime Minister for 4 years. He didn't create jobs. He didn't get the economy moving. He wasn't a competent leader. He got there because he had the backing of the military, and when the military got sick of him, he lost all support. So, below that, people live, but they are not governed. Are they ungovernable? Is the country ungovernable? No, I don't believe that's a state in any place. It's just the governance that they have lets them down.
Charles, if we contemplate this from an outside perspective, which we are obviously doing, sitting in a studio in London, one of the very few unguarded remarks President Barack Obama made during his term was words to the effect that Pakistan was the one thing that really kept him awake at nights. Is that still a reasonable assessment if you're looking at this from the perspective of an outside power?
If you think about parts of the world that themselves are unstable, that breed instability, that harbor instability, and that have porous borders in strategic regions, and that are bleeding and, forgive me for the analogy, but bleeding and absorbing sort of nefarious trends that are regional in location but global in impact, you have absolutely got to put Pakistan at the exact center of that sort of country. It's the sort of place that never having been there, it's the sort of place that I imagine you probably couldn't even make up if you wanted to. It is regionally important with vast global implications.
Just finally on this one, Lynn, and I don't wish this to sound glib, I'm just genuinely curious. If we look at the situation as it currently is, as we understand it, i.e. we have imprisoned, semi-martyred former Prime Minister, enormous crowds of extremely angry people descending upon the capital, which may or may not hold, what is actually the best possible outcome here?
I guess the best possible outcome is that everybody goes, okay, that was fun, and goes home. You don't sound confident. Well, they'll all get tired eventually. But is there going to be a revolution? Is that what you're talking about? The end case scenario being? No, there's not going to be. The Pakistani state has the monopoly on power. And that means that you send the army. They've got the paramilitary there already. They've got the army on standby. If it looks like it's going to get out of hand, you send the army in, and nobody wants to get shot in the street.
Well, let's move along. And from the stop us if you've heard this one before file, Russia has declared that, by golly, it wants to do its bit to help make Afghanistan a peaceful and prosperous nation. Last time this notion popped into Moscow's head, circa 1979, it led to a decade of ruinous war and the collapse of the Soviet Union, but surely they couldn't screw it up twice, etc. A Russian delegation led by Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of Russia's Security Council, has been visiting the Taliban in Kabul with a view to expanding political and economic cooperation between the weirdo pariah state who everyone else has given up on and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Bazing, I'm here all week. Charles, what is going on here? Why is Sergei Shoigu in Kabul? Why does he want to be friends with the Taliban?
Yeah, there are people who think that history is linear in the way it progresses, and there are people who feel that history is cyclical in the way it progresses. And when you see a Russian general in Afghanistan, you have to think, well, the linear folks are not really following the plot very carefully, and that, to see a Russian general in Afghanistan is really quite a remarkable thing for all of the reasons that you pointed out at the top of the piece. So I think a couple of things are going on here. First of all, poor Sergei Shoigu, who was once, the Minister of Defense and is now the head of the Security Council, which is not a bad job in Russia, but it's not the best job in Russia, and frequently a political pawn. This tells us a few things. First of all, it shows us once again how extremely limited Russia's circle of friends is, and for Russia to be going back into Afghanistan saying, "Look, listen, we'll solve your sort of ethnic and sectarian and sort of terrorist-backed internal strife," is just sort of rich on the face of it. Number one, but number two, they've got nowhere else to go, and so they're working very closely with North Korea at the moment, also working very, very closely with Iran at the moment. So, geez, it must be time to engage with Afghanistan. That's one thing that's happening. Two is that this is just absolutely epic trolling of the United States, because in addition to saying we're going to solve all of your sort of internal strife, we're going to ask the United States to come back and rebuild your country because they're the ones that blew it apart in the first place. And knowing full well that neither the current administration, which left, I don't know, somewhat less or more or less gracefully than the Americans left Saigon in 1975, left Afghanistan with their tail between their legs. There's no way they're going back now. And even more so, starting in January of next year, there's no way the United States is going to get involved with Afghanistan, no matter how warmly the Russians invite them to come back and rebuild the place.
A couple of things there I do want to come back to, Charles, in terms of the United States reaction. But Lynn, first of all, a quote from Shoigu I have here that I want to run by you. He's talking about how this relationship will allow us to establish an effective dialogue on the issues of countering security challenges and threats such as terrorism and drug trafficking. I'm not clear whether they're talking about combating it or conducting it, to be honest.
Yeah, well, exactly, because the only thing that the Taliban are doing is conducting it. So I guess there's a lot to talk about. But other than that, what the Taliban are basically doing is trolling the world, is in repeating over and over the lines that we have banned narcotics production and we have created a safer place in Afghanistan, when they're actually boosting the production of heroin, moving wholesale into the production of methamphetamine, and harbouring 24 terrorist and jihadist organisations that threaten just about every country in the world, including Russia and the Central Asian states under Russia's umbrella. And Al-Qaeda is also deeply embedded in the administration. So, yeah, it's all lies. It's not even smoke and mirrors. It's just blatant lies.
But Charles, all that factored in, and going back to what we were saying earlier about how everyone here is kind of trolling the United States, is there any sensible reaction to this from the United States or indeed the wider West beyond, well, good luck, have fun? Yeah,
no, I think that the United States right now has other fish to fry and is, for the next 8 weeks or so, a hugely introspective country sorting out the transition. And on January 20th, when President-elect Trump takes the oath of office, of all of the things that are going to be on his very heavy first day agenda and even first 100 days agenda, and maybe for the extent of his entire 4-year term, I can't see him paying any attention to Afghanistan. I mean, we have a direct threat to European and global security with the war in Ukraine, and he wants done with that. Where is the incentive for the United States to reengage in that part of Central Asia at all?
I mean, is there any actual advantage to Russia in Afghanistan, Lynn, in the way that the Soviet Union thought that there was an advantage in possessing Afghanistan or influencing Afghanistan?
Advantage in possessing Afghanistan, I guess the Soviets mapped Afghanistan's natural resources a long time ago, and it does have an awful lot to offer, but it has no infrastructure, so there's an awful lot of investment that goes into that first. But to Charles's point about whether or not the Trump administration is going to pay attention to Afghanistan, I think that it may come. Rubio has made comments already about the Taliban, and you've got what's the NSA guy's name?
The incoming one.
Waltz.
Waltz.
Is also familiar with Afghanistan. You've got America handing over tens of millions of dollars on a monthly basis, something like $20 billion in aid over the last 3 years alone. And Trump, as we know, does not like giving away stuff for free. And he also doesn't like giving away stuff to China, and he's not going to like the fact that Iran has also got a toe in the water when it comes to developing natural resources there, or having a close relationship, a security relationship with the Taliban. The Taliban are also in bed with Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and all the other fellow travellers. So I think taking all of this into account, if Trump does over the term of his coming presidency ignore Afghanistan, he's ignoring a huge security headache.
Yeah, I very much take your point on that. And to the extent that all of this stuff is interconnected, Afghanistan is one of the pressure points, and you're absolutely right that there may be scope for work on that in the administration.
Well, we will move along, and when former, in fact, German Chancellor Angela Merkel began work on her memoir after leaving office in 2021, she may have fondly imagined that the accompanying book tour would be a hugely enjoyable round of supplicating interviewers queuing to admire her calm, her resolve and her unfussy pragmatism before returning to the office to rattle up several thousand words to the effect that they don't make them like her anymore. It has not quite worked out that way. Instead, Merkel is having to answer for the consequences of a Russia policy, which may have seemed like a good idea at the time. Charles, are you agog to read Freedom, Memoirs 1954 to 2021?
First of all, just the nerve of releasing a book this week is, something that...
Yeah, I think she's probably done it to upset you personally.
Well, and it's worked.
She said to her publishers at a meeting, when's Hecker's book out?
Exactly
I want to destroy him.
The truth of the matter...
She's spoken of little else in these interviews.
Precisely. The truth of the matter, Andrew, is I can't wait to get my hands on this book. I've ordered it. I've pre-ordered it. It's coming, I think, tomorrow. And I can't wait.
It's too late to grovel to her now, Charles.
No, I know.
She intends to crush you like a bug.
Angela, if you're listening. And I can't wait to crack it open and jump in. I mean, at 720 pages, it's daunting. And I have to say that the initial reviews have taken some of the energy out of my initial enthusiasm. But it's
light on chuckles, I understand.
The Irish Times has absolutely slated it, saying that it is dull, dreadful, and some other D word that I forgot. But they've given it a real drubbing. The FT has said that there are rather largest sections of it, and in 720 pages, there's got to be sections that are boring. And the FT has confirmed that, while saying, though, that it is a worthwhile read for anybody who, like myself, was expecting this to be partly a revenge autobiography.
They all are.
This one apparently isn't. And so if you're looking for juicy tidbits, there are some, but not as many as you may want.
It cannot be as boring as what I think of as the benchmark of the dull head of government, head of state memoir. I promise you, Bill Clinton's Oh, my God.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of disappointing because you would have thought Clinton, he has a turn of phrase. He clearly does have a sense of humour. His book is unreadable. But returning to Angela Merkel's, Lynn, you can tell I had to review it. Like when it came out 300 years ago, I'm still that angry. If you were one of the journalists granted an audience with the former Chancellor, what would you ask her?
What did you leave out?
Well, it's 720 pages, not much, clearly.
Well, that's sad because, if Bill Clinton, I haven't read Bill Clinton's memoir, but if it
nobody
was
has,
boring,
apart from people like me who had to.
But there were things that he clearly left out, right? One, that if he included all of the salacious stuff that it didn't pass you by, I don't imagine that there was much to leave out of Angela's term in office.
The reviews that you mentioned, Charles, and many of them have been unkind, have suggested a reluctance to admit error, specifically where Russia is concerned. I mean, it's common in political memoirs. I mean, sometimes you will get somebody admitting, we kind of screwed that up. Tony Blair's memoir, which is actually hugely readable, does contain a few moments of that kind where he just says, in retrospect, completely terrible idea and we shouldn't have done it. But where Russia in particular is concerned, are we able to say now that she was not just wrong in retrospect, but she was wrong at the time? People were telling her at the time this is going to be a disaster and she should have listened to them.
Yes and no. And the problem is that the people who were telling her that this was a huge mistake were all outside of Germany. But with certain exceptions, of course, with the opposition in Germany. But she was being absolutely begged, implored and importuned to get as much cheap Russian gas into Germany as possible by the very, very powerful German business lobby who was just absolutely gulping and mainlining Russian natural gas. And so domestically, these were decisions that were unanimous in the business community and to which she was responding to. And really the only people who were telling her that she was making a big mistake primarily was outside of Germany.
I did just want to close with trying to get a couple of more constructive recommendations for our listeners. Do either of you have any I'll ask you first, Lynn, favourite political memoirs that you actually enjoyed? I will make a case for a different president's memoir, Ulysses S. Grant, which I like mostly because he hated being president, so his memoir barely mentions that. It's mostly a quite entertaining account of his service in the military. Mark Twain published it, no less.
I will admit to not being a big reader of political autobiography. I keep telling myself that I will get around to them, but I think at that time where I have 2 years on the beach, I will take half a dozen that are recommended to me by friends as really worthwhile reads. And I think I would like to read a variety of eras and nationalities, like Indira Gandhi, for instance. And as you say, you've recommended Ulysses S. Grant and his the arc of history, because Charles and I were talking about this before, people who were writing, for instance, about their political life and decisions and policy making before, in the first half of last century. They were actually changing the world. I don't know whether I would find Tony Blair's biography more than self-indulgent.
Oh, it has moments of that sort, but genuinely it is actually quite a racy read. Charles, do you have a favourite?
So Lynn and I discovered that we have a few things in common this afternoon, and one of them is that neither of us are very big readers of political autobiography. And so, if there's a long-term beach holiday or, heaven forbid, another lockdown, that's when I will finally turn my hand, once I'm finished with the Merkel book, which will be my first sort of diving into political autobiography. All of the people who tell me I should be reading more political biographies or autobiographies are saying read everything that Robert Caro ever wrote and read the LBJ biographies because those are among the best pieces of political writing ever. And we'll see how it goes with Merkel.
Charles Hecker and Lynn O'Donnell, thank you both for joining us. Finally on today's show, it is a makeable case that on no subject is there a greater imbalance of importance and understanding than China. China is obviously a vast, powerful and crucial nation, but in the West at least, remarkably little is actually known about it. Ask any passerby or indeed yourself to name a dozen living noteworthy citizens of the People's Republic. The beginnings of a cure are offered by the latest edition, the 169th of the Literary Journal.
I'd say the answer to that is threefold. On the one hand, Granta has had a long relationship with the subcontinent, several issues devoted to India, Pakistan, and we have a lot of readers in the subcontinent, but the idea was to sort of go into new territory in East Asia as we'd never done a China issue before. Secondly, we felt that the larger world political scene was sort of pushing China away. And we thought, we would bring it closer. And what better way to do that than to look at the literary culture, which takes you sort of into the rivulets and blood veins of the country. So there was that as well. And then it occurred to us a little bit late in the game, but there's a new literary development or movement happening in China out of the Northeast, out of the deindustrializing Northeast, where you're getting a sort of new type of realism in a lot of the short stories and novels from there. And so by happenstance, we happened to also kind of capture that in the issue, which we were quite excited about.
I mean, the book is a mixture of fiction, non-fiction, poetry and photography and interviews by or with various people. And again, when you're trying to paint a picture of a place as big and diverse and ever-changing as China, how do you narrow it down to who your contributors are going to be?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we rely quite a bit on our translators and translation networks because we didn't have very much Mandarin on staff. And so we relied a lot on translators to sort of introduce us to different writers and different translators. And we sort of went from there kind of vetting through all of that material. But I think that you want to have a bit of a regional, you want to go through the different regions and provinces and see what's going on in different parts of China so that it's not all Beijing, Shanghai centric. But you also want to look at different generations, because one of the most interesting things about Chinese literature is just the different styles and commitments that appeared in different generations, the 1980s generation, the 1990s generation, and the current one. So that was a huge emphasis of the issue, I'd say.
But for the current generation in particular, and this is a question which I'm sure will occur to people approaching the book, that the Chinese Communist Party is not known for its enthusiasm for freedom of expression. So how possible is even being a writer in China now? I was struck in the interview with Wu Qi, which is entitled The Rules of the Game, where he said every writer knows where the line is.
I think that Wu Qi might be slightly overstating things there. But nevertheless, I think one of the misconceptions about censorship in China is that it's sort of done in a kind of blanket fashion, when the Chinese writers that I met spoke of it as a much more ad hoc, complicated dialogue between the writer and the censors about what particular things would get through and wouldn't, but also a sort of general sense among writers of where that line was shifting or where it would be at any given moment. So it's quite a complicated thing. But for instance, Mo Yan, one of the most famous Chinese writers, has also had his own work censored occasionally or not allowed to be printed in China. But that only has happened with a few books, but he's sort of one of the PRC's favorite in-house writers almost. So even a kind of an established writer who's quite favorably viewed by the party can still come up against censorship, but it's not necessarily treated as a sort of end-all, be-all situation. Of course, it can be in certain situations.
So when you put together a book like this, and especially, I guess, when you add to that your own experiences of China, which you do write about in your own introduction, what does it occur to you that most Western coverage / analysis of China is missing? What are we not seeing?
Yes, I'm very glad you asked that, because one of the things that we were trying to do in the issue was to say Chinese literature has been treated, I think, very badly by the West. And what I mean by that is that traditionally, for the past 30 years, it's been viewed sort of in the same way that literature coming out of Eastern Europe was viewed in the Cold War, right? Where you sort of look through it and try to pluck out dissident writers who seem sort of worthy and anti-state or something like that. So you're kind of looking for your Milan Kunderas and your Václav Havels, and then you have them and you print them in your nice magazines in the West. And we thought, kind of golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto us. I mean, what if the Chinese were to look at Western literature that way, or let's say American literature, right? Well, we'll run Cormac McCarthy because there's a kind of anti-imperial undertone in his work. Philip Roth seems a little bit too committed to the American project, patriotic project, so we'll keep him out. So one would have a sort of strange sort of censorship regime, if the Chinese were to read us in the way that we often have been reading them. And so one of the things that we were trying to do in this issue is sort of break through that and just sort of have it as open season, open territory, and not kind of be looking at everything through a sort of dissident prism. Not that that's an illegitimate way to look at something, but it's just a restrictive one when it comes to literary culture.
And that was Thomas Meany, editor of Granta, and Granta's new publication, China, is available now. And that is it for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Lynn O'Donnell and Charles Hecker. Thanks also to Alison Kaplan-Sommer at Haaretz in Tel Aviv. Today's show was produced by Laura Kramer and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.